This video is for absolute beginners. Enamel, latex, eggshell, acrylic, matte, primer. What does all this mean? My goal with this video is I want you to be able to go to a paint store or a paint website, read the label on the cans, and be able to know exactly what you are looking for, exactly what you are shopping for, so that you can purchase your paint with confidence. To understand paint, first of all, you must understand how paint is made. Paint is made of 4 primary ingredients: pigments, resins, or binders. It's the exact same thing. It's just some people call it binders, some people call them resins. But when we're talking about resins or binders, we're talking about the exact same thing. Solvents and additives. Let's talk about pigments first. Pigments are what gives paint its color and texture. Here's how it works. Pigments are ground up into a fine powder and then added to a resin. When you think of pigments, think of a ground up, really fine colored powder. Whenever you think of resins, think of something really thick and sticky like a tree sap or honey. So the resin or the binder is what holds everything together. So you have this really thick resin that has all this colored powder mixed in and added to it. And now they add the solvent. A solvent is what's added to that resin pigment mix to make it liquidy and spreadable. The solvent is the liquid material that carries the solid components to the wall. It's what allows the paint to be wet, if you will. Once the paint has been applied to the surface, the solvent will evaporate, leaving that dry colored film on the surface. Now let's talk about additives. As the name suggests, additives are added to the mixture to improve different properties about the paint. Here's a couple of examples. If the paint claims to have special features like quick drying, mold resistant, scuff resistant, or heat resistant, it is usually the result of additives being put and added into the paint. Now let's get into the actual paints. Paints can be broken down into 2 primary categories: oil-based paint and water-based paint. Those titles are referring specifically to the solvent in the paint, oil or water. Let's look at the differences. Oil-based paint is more durable than water-based paint. Oil-based paint dries slower than water-based paint. Oil-based paint has stronger odors, so higher levels of VOCs. It's way more toxic than the water-based paint. Oil-based paint is also a lot harder to clean up. You need things like paint thinners. So you would use mineral spirits, things like that, to clean up oil-based paint. Water-based paint is a lot easier. You can use simply soap and water to clean up afterwards. Also, oil-based paints require a lot more skill to apply. It's a lot harder to apply oil-based, whereas with water-based paints, it's a lot easier to apply. And lastly, oil-based paints are a lot less flexible. So think of a rubber band. You take a rubber band, you stretch it, it's nice and flexible. With your oil-based paints, they don't have that flexibility, so they tend to crack over time. Whereas with your latex water-based paints, they are a lot more flexible, so they're a lot less likely to crack. You would call them crack resistant. Something that I'll also add is water-based paints are also yellow resistant. So oil-based paints have a tendency to get yellowish over time. So water-based paints, yellowish resistant. Okay, next section of the video, when do I choose oil-based paint instead of water-based paint? So oil-based paints are typically used for high traffic areas or areas that experience a lot of wear and tear, or areas that experience high levels of moisture. Oil-based paint dries into a hard, heavy-duty shell that's more durable and resistant to scuffs and also rubbing off when you're trying to clean it than the water-based paint version. And as I said, oil-based paints are mostly used in high traffic areas in a home, like your hallways, your playroom for children. Oil-based paints are also really good for bathrooms because of the excess in moisture and humidity. Also kitchens and cabinets. So kitchen cabinets, bathroom cabinets, also doors, trim, baseboards. A lot of times those are oil-based, as well as your furniture. So your bookshelves, your dressers, etc. Now the irony with all of this is what you'll notice is when you go to the stores, there isn't a big selection of oil-based paint. You don't have a lot of oil-based paints to choose from. Actually, what you'll notice, here's the irony, is that 80% of the selection on the shelves is all water-based paint. And this is just because of all of the new technology. Nowadays, the additives that they add to the water-based paints are designed to make the water-based paints perform as if they were oil-based paints. So all these additives they put in the water-based paints is supposed to do the same job as your oil-based paints. Nowadays, you can buy special water-based paints that have additives added to them that make them mold resistant or scuff resistant. Now, whether or not manufacturers have accomplished the feat of making their water-based paint perform at the same level as the oil-based paint, well, that's just subjective. That just depends on who you ask. Now, if you talk to a traditionalist and you ask them, have they accomplished the feat? They'll be like, heck no. Water-based paint ain't no oil-based paint. Throw the water-based paint in the trash, we're going oil-based. And emotions run high, and you get all types of verbal phraseologies. So it's just very subjective. It depends on who you ask. But if you ask me, do water-based paints outperform oil-based? No. At the end of the day, oil-based paint is still king, but nowadays they make some really good water-based paints that can do the job and will be perfectly fine for your regular DIYer. And since 80% of your selection are water-based paints, it's very important you understand the different types of water-based paints. And so that's what we're going to go to now in this part of the video. Okay, so what are the different types of water-based paints? When you shop for your paint, the majority of your major brands are going to have what's called paint grades of quality. The higher the quality, the more you're going to pay. The lower the quality, the less you're going to pay. There are typically 3 tiers of quality. Number 1 is your entry-level paint. Number 2 is high-end paint. And number 3 is super premium paint. Now keep that in mind as a preface because I'm going to show you how that plays out for the remainder of this video. There are 2 types of water-based paint that you're going to encounter. Latex paint and acrylic paint. Water-based paints use acrylic as the resin binder. The more acrylic you have, the more durable the paint. And paints have different levels of acrylic. Some 20%, 30%, 50%, 75%, 100%. Now if you see a can that says 100% acrylic, it doesn't mean that the entire can is nothing but acrylic. It just means that the amount of resin to be considered 100% acrylic is at its maximum capacity within the paint. 100% acrylic is extremely durable. It's washable, it's scrubbable, and it won't leave a mark whenever you go to try to clean it. A cheap 20% acrylic paint will rub off super easy. If you're going to use a water-based paint, mark my words, always use 100% acrylic paint. If you're building your house, get it in writing. Don't let your builder cut corners and use some cheap 20%, 30% acrylic paint. Make sure they're using 100% acrylic paint. With that being said, I told you that you have latex paint and acrylic paint. Latex paint is the cheap stuff. It would be your entry-level stuff. Now, latex paint does have acrylic in it, but they add other resins to it, like vinyl. So typically the latex paint has a vinyl acrylic mix as its resin. It may be a 50-50 mix, it might be a 75-25% mix, but at the end of the day, a acrylic vinyl resin is not 100% acrylic. And you always want to use 100% acrylic as your resin for your paint. Forget about the vinyl stuff. Now sometimes when you go shop for your paint, you'll see on the can, it'll say acrylic latex paint. So they make it all confusing. So when you see that, you just need to clarify with whoever's going to sell you that paint, is it 100% acrylic or not? It might be, it might not be, because they make it all confusing with the label acrylic latex paint. Best thing to do is just find a can that says specifically 100% acrylic. And as you go up in price and quality, you will start to notice that those higher end paints are all indeed 100% acrylic. Okay, next part of this video, what does enamel mean? So from time to time as you're shopping, you're going to encounter the word enamel. Enamel just refers to a paint's finish. They'll say it has an enamel finish, which just means that it's going to dry into a hard shell to make it more durable. Enamel is not some kind of ingredient. It's just a characteristic or a property of the final product. Remember that I told you that oil-based paints dry into a hard shell and that's what makes them super durable? Well, a water-based paint that is an enamel is designed to function as if it was an oil-based paint drying into a hard shell. A water-based paint that is an enamel is one of the super premium grades. So naturally, the highest grade water-based paint that you can purchase will be a 100% acrylic enamel finish. And FYI, whenever you purchase a water-based paint and you use it, you always want to let it cure for 30 days before you try to clean it. The next part of this video is I want to talk a little bit more about expensive paint versus cheap paint. So as I said, you always get what you pay for. Entry-level stuff is junk. Let me give you an example. You can buy a $40 a gallon paint, which is higher quality. If you buy some entry-level stuff, let's say that's $20 a gallon, you would need 2 gallons to do the same job as the $40 a gallon paint, because the $40 a gallon paint covers so much better. You could finish your job with the $40 a gallon paint in 1 to 2 coats, whereas if you get the $20 a gallon paint, it would take you 3 to 4 coats to get the same result. So you buy the cheap paint thinking that you're saving money on the gallon price, but in the end, it all equals out anyways. And depending on how you look at it, it might actually be more expensive to use the cheap paint because it's going to take you twice as long because you have to do twice as many coats. And as we know, time is money. So with a higher quality paint, you'll spend half the time brushing and rolling. I want to give you another quick tip about cheap paints. Cheap paints use pigment materials like clay. The problem with clay is that it can't be ground as finely as the better pigment materials. And you can actually tell whether a paint is good or not by rubbing it between your fingers. If it feels gritty, right, like sandy, it probably contains a cheap pigment material or some kind of cheap filler. This type of paint will not last as long as your higher end paints. Okay, next part of the video. The next thing we need to talk about is what is primer paint? Or just what is primer? So let's say I wanted to stick this to the wall. What would I do? I put a little piece of tape there and it would stick to the tape. Or I could put some glue on the wall and I could put this on the glue and it would stick because of the glue. The glue is sticky and it helps this piece of paper stick to the wall. So think of primer like glue. Primer is your base coat that prepares the wall for the paint. So the primer increases your paint's adhesion to the wall and durability. Another benefit of primer is that it will block and hide surface stains from coming through the paint. So a lot of the times you'll hear primer referred to as a stain blocker. So the way it works is primer would go first, then your paint. First primer, second top coat, right? Base coat, top coat. And the most famous primer, of course, is Kilts. The next thing I need to address is when to use primer. You always want to use primer when you're going to paint surfaces like drywall, masonry, or wood. The reason why is because these surfaces are porous. And so because of this, these surfaces can absorb that paint unevenly. And then you might end up painting with more coats and using more paint than you anticipated. And primer is typically less expensive than paint. So it would be way more cost effective to use multiple coats of primer versus multiple coats of paint. It's also good to use primer whenever you're changing colors and you're going to paint a lighter color over top of a darker color. The primer will prevent the old color, that old dark color, from coming through and penetrating the new lighter color. And also you want to use primer if you're going to put a water-based paint over top of an oil-based paint. So one of the cardinal sins, if you will, in the paint world is that you never paint a water-based paint over top of an oil-based paint because it will start to peel within a matter of days. Now you can put an oil-based paint over top of a water-based paint, no problem. But if you're going to put a water-based paint over top of an oil-based paint, then you would have to lightly sand that surface first, then put some primer, then place your water-based paint on the oil-based paint, and you'd be fine. Now I want to talk for a moment about your primer paints all in one can. Sometime when you walk down the aisle and you're looking at the cans, you'll notice a can that says paint and primer. So what they're doing is marketing it as a paint primer all in one. What does that mean? Does that mean that primer is added to the paint so there's like kilts that's inside of the paint? What does that mean? The answer is no. What it is it's just a paint that has additives added to it that allow it to act and perform as though the wall had been primed first. It's just a high quality paint that has additives added to it that increases its stain blocking and adhesion capabilities. But there's no actual primer in the paint itself. And finally, there's one last thing that you need to understand and you'll be good to go. And that is paint sheens, or they're also called paint finishes. There are 6 primary paint finishes you're going to encounter: flat, matte, eggshell, satin, semi-gloss, gloss. At the top end of the spectrum, you've got gloss. It's very shiny and very durable. At the low end of the spectrum, you've got flat. Flat is not shiny whatsoever and consequently is not durable at all. So the higher you go, the shinier the finish and the more durable. You normally find flat on your ceilings. The most common kind of finish on your walls would be matte or eggshell. They kind of battle it out. These walls right here are eggshell. You don't find satin as much because satin is typically too shiny for walls, but not shiny enough for baseboards and trim. Semi-gloss is the #1 finish that you find on your baseboards and your trim. And when I say trim, I mean things like window casings, doors and door frames, crown molding, baseboards, that type of stuff. So those are your paint sheens explained. The only other thing you're going to need to know is whether you need to buy an interior paint or an exterior. And it'll say that right on the can. Interior or exterior. So now I want to take you to the store and actually we can look at the cans so that you will be able to shop for your paint with confidence. Okay, so we're at Lowe's and what we're going to do is we're going to use Valspar as our example, and what you're going to notice is as we go down this aisle, the paint starting here is going to be your cheap stuff. And as you go all the way down the aisle, we're going to get into higher quality paint. And Valspar is going to be the brand for our example. So this is the cheapest stuff that you can get that they make. It's called an express coat. And we're going to be looking at the price of the semi-gloss. So as you can see, we've got eggshell, we've got flat, here's your finishes, your sheens.
Well, we're going to be looking at the semi-gloss. The semi-gloss is the most popular, of course. So the Valspar Express Coat is your cheapest paint that they make. It's $22 a gallon, $22.98. If you look at it, this is just a plain paint. It's going to be mostly water, and there's no special features. There's no additives. This is not like a paint primer. It doesn't even have acrylic in it. This is just a latex paint. You flip this around and you'll find acrylic not even mentioned on this can. All we got is a good touch-up soap and water cleanup, so you know it's a water-based paint because you can use soap and water. But this is the cheapest paint Valspar makes. As we go from the Express Coat, we go to their 4000 series. This is their 4000 series. Valspar 4000 interior paint. Semi-gloss is our example. Now this is $25 a can. And it just says good hide coverage, so it's just going to be a little bit thicker. The solid content is going to be a little bit thicker. This is going to cover a tad bit better. That's why it's a little bit more expensive. If we flip it around here, still no special features. Acrylic is not even mentioned on this can. All we got is smooth uniform finish, soap and water cleanup. So it's still just a basic cheap paint. Let's go from their 4000 series. Look at all the 4000s. The only difference in all those cans is the sheen. Semi-gloss, eggshell, and flat. And of course the price changes a little bit with the sheen, but semi-gloss is our example here. Let's come down here next to their 2000 series. So we're looking at the interior. We're looking at interior, semi-gloss. And this is $30 a gallon. Why? Well, now we're at our paint primer. And remember, a paint primer, it doesn't mean it has primer mixed into it. It's just that there's an additive added to this paint that's going to make it act as though the wall's been primed first. So it's going to be cover a little bit thicker. It's got better adhesion, better stain blocking capabilities, and so it's a little bit more expensive. But if we flip around here, acrylic is nowhere mentioned on this can. This still has no acrylic. We got good flow and leveling for uniform finish. We got mildew resistant finish, so the additive, it's got a mildew resistant finish, so that's why it's a little bit more expensive. But still, there's no acrylic in this paint. If it does have acrylic, it's not going to be 100% acrylic. It's going to be it's going to be an acrylic vinyl mix or something. And remember, for water-based paints, what you always want to make sure you're doing is you're buying it 100% acrylic. So let's move on. All those cans are 2000 series, and the only difference in all those cans is the sheen. So let's come down here to the next grade up. The next level up will be the Valspar Ultra series. Let's look at our semi-gloss interior right here. And we're at $42 a gallon. Why? Well, it's a paint primer, for one. Scrub shield technology. But what I want you to see, so flip around here, and as we go up in quality, like I said, notice 100% acrylic. Plus it's got mold and mildew. It's got mildew resistant finish, great stain resistance, dual protection, resists scrubs and stains. So it's just got some additives, so it's just a better quality paint here. That's why we've gone up. But notice, now we're at 100% acrylic. This is what you want. That's the Ultra series. You got all those Ultras up there. It's just the sheen. That's why there's all the different cans. So if you need semi-gloss, there's semi-gloss. If you needed satin, there's satin. Eggshells down there, etc. Let's go up down here to the next grade. And we come down to the Valspar Signature. Let's look at their interior semi-gloss. Right here. Price, $48 a gallon. So we started at $20 a gallon, and then with the Ultra we were at $42 a gallon, and now with the Signature we're at $48 a gallon. let's take a look at some of the features. Still a paint primer. We got scuff shield technology. Let's flip it over here and look at the features. Triple protection. Resist scuffs, scrubs, and stains. Mildew resistant finish. 100% acrylic lifetime limited warranty. Okay, so just a better paint. It's going to have a lot more solid content in it. It's going to cover a lot better. That's why we're going up in price. Let's keep going. Now we come down here to the Valspar Reserve. The Valspar Reserve series. And this is their top end, top of the line. This is their highest grade of paint, is the Reserve. Let's come down here to the semi-gloss. And we're at $60 a gallon, $58.98. Now, what's so special about this? Well, let's look. One coat interior paint and primer. So this is some really, it's got some really good coverage to it. Color stays true longer. Let's flip it around here. We're still at 100% acrylic. Our most advanced protection in just one coat. So there you go. They say this only takes one coat, and that's why it's so expensive. So that is the Valspar series there. They're the Valspar lineup. I want to show you something else though. I want us to go down here to the very end. What happens is we go down here to the very end, we're going to get our highest quality interior water-based paint. Now, here's some Sherwin-Williams stuff. Not Sherman, but Sherwin-Williams stuff. But I want you to see something. Remember I told you the highest quality paint you can get is 100% acrylic enamel? Well, this right here is $70 a gallon. This is the Sherwin-Williams Infinity lineup here. Check it out. Let's go to interior semi-gloss. $70 a gallon. So it's a paint primer. Repels stains. Resists scuff marks and scratches. So this is just special additives. One coat perfection guaranteed. And check it out. Look at that. 100% acrylic enamel finish. That's your highest quality water-based paint. 100% acrylic enamel. So it's gonna finish and dry into that hard shell. So they're trying to get it to perform like an oil-based paint. So that's it, my friends. I took you through from $20 a gallon all the way to $70 a gallon. But if you notice, it wasn't until we got down here to $42 a gallon before we ever encountered 100% acrylic. So all this here along this wall is your interior paints. And we just went down the whole aisle. And then you come over here on this wall, all this is going to be your exterior paints. Same principle though. Just you look at the labels, look at the features, look for 100% acrylic. Check it out. Valspar exterior. So there's all your exteriors. And then you come down here. Down here's your primers. There's your kilts. There's your gallon kilts. So that's our paint aisle. Now I'm going to show you guys why I didn't spend much time explaining oil-based paints in this video. That's all your paint I just showed you. Come over here and we got more paint. See those cans right there? This is the only oil-based paint in the store. I told you 80% of your selection is water-based. All this stuff right here, small cans, and then the Rust-Oleum down there. So this is Rust-Oleum brand. And see it? Rust-Oleum is oil-based. So this is the only oil-based paint in the store. That's why I didn't spend a lot of time explaining oil-based. I may make a separate video going into more detail about oil-based paints, but that's for another time. I hope that this video has been valuable to you and you understand a little bit more about paint. Like I said, this video is for absolute beginners. If you like the video, give it a big Clean with Confidence thumbs up. It really helps me out. Until next time, my friends, I will see y'all in the next video.